Sumaiya Omar, you're from hashtag Our Stories. What do you do?
So I'm co-founder of Hashtag Our Stories, and we are a global news network, and we train communities how to tell stories using their mobile phones, and we create shows out of those stories. We do social mobile video created by citizens and curated by journalists.
When we go back to the beginning of this, where did your idea come from, and why did you find it important to put all your time and effort in it?
I mean, there was a lot of things that happened that made us start Hashtag Our Stories, but the biggest one was that we found that traditional media were missing some of the biggest stories of our time. Whether we look at Brexit, whether we look at Trump, we found that the traditional media were looking at polls and pundits, and they weren't looking and they weren't listening to real people on the ground. And we saw the benefit in doing really hyper-local stories, in empowering people, not for us to be the voice of the voiceless, but for them to have an amplified voice, to turn offline relationships into online relationships.
And then you see that potential, and of course I agree with it, but going from potential to a reality, that is can be a long road as well. So how and where did you start?
So Hashtag Our Stories started with a 40-country tour that Yusuf and I did in 4 months. And in those 4 months, we visited those countries and we identified communities who were largely underrepresented and underserved. And for us, this was a passion that we always had. And we didn't necessarily think that it would turn into a business or into this company that we have today. But we went to these 40 countries and we empowered these people. And we really started to see what could happen if people knew how to use this atomic agent of change that we have in our pockets all the time. So we began to see exactly how this would work. I mean, Yusuf told us a story in his speech about, and this was during his time at the Hindustan Times, where it really clicked for him was that he went and trained this group of waste pickers, of garbage collectors in India. And he trained them how to use Instagram stories. And for the longest of time, he heard nothing. And he assumed that the training had failed. Only when the Indian government decided to raise the GST taxes, the goods and services taxes on recyclable goods, did these people start to go to Instagram stories and speak their truth and tell the world exactly how they were feeling. And with the help of advocacy groups and activists and politicians and a whole lot of other people, it wasn't just these videos isolated, but it was the work of all of these people. But the videos allowed these voices to be amplified. The Indian government eventually reduced the GST taxes. And so that's when it really clicked as to what the impact could be, the social impact of allowing people and of giving people a platform to be able to tell their stories.
So you said we in those 40 countries, we looked for underrepresented communities. So Can you give some more example? When is something a community, or what do they have in common in those cases?
A community can be anything. I mean, for example, we did refugee communities in Serbia. We did human trafficking survivors in Abu Dhabi. Another community was waste pickers. Another community was sexual abuse survivors. So it's just people that we don't hear from. Another community could be women who cover their faces. So it's people who are spoken about, but not necessarily spoken to. And those are the types of people that we want to do stories on, and those are the type of communities that we feel need to have their voices amplified.
So you don't look for skateboarders in Amsterdam?
Yes, of course it could be that. It could be skateboarders in Amsterdam. It could be anything. And anyone could form a community, or anyone could be part of any community. So we don't discriminate against certain types of communities. We want to hear from everyone. Yeah.
And so you said we train them. So do you then spend an afternoon with them and telling what works and what doesn't work? How does the training? What does the training look like?
So we go to these communities and we'll spend a day or two or more time if we have the time, and we teach them a number of things. The first thing is we teach them media literacy. We teach them about fact-checking and how to identify fake news. We teach them about how to shoot with their phones, how to create videos, how to edit, and most importantly, we teach them how to make it travel on the internet. We teach them the things that they can do, the technical skills that they can use to make their videos, I don't want to say go viral, but reach as many people as possible.
So, and is that things like using hashtags, etc.?
Those kinds of things. It's like if you're producing something for Facebook, what are the tips and tricks that you can use, like hashtags, like headlines, like how long the video should be, like the kinds of shots you need, mid-length, wide or tight shots, and that kind of thing. So we give them a full training based on media literacy, but also on the technical skills of how to shoot and edit. Yeah.
You said originally it wasn't necessary the idea to make it into a company. So what triggered you to go further with this?
Yeah. So I think what triggered us was that we started to get a lot of interest from brands, from newsrooms, from all of these people who wanted to tell stories the way that we tell stories, who wanted to tell stories in a way that could relate to different audiences, in the language of audiences. And we were able to create a business out of sponsored content, out of training and consulting and things like that. So it kind of happened very organically, yeah.
So what is your aim now?
Our aim is to continue to create this global newsroom to empower more people, to amplify more voices, to create more stories from more parts of the world and from more communities.
An important thing, because I saw your opening speech this morning. An important thing you mentioned there is, say, the combination of the stories of the people with the power of journalism. How see you? Maybe you can tell that again, because I was there, of course. But how do you see that combination work the best?
Yeah, I think that there's this fear from journalists or from traditional media that because of the democratization of media and social media, that citizen reporters can do the jobs that they can do, and so their jobs are or Mojos can do what they do, so their jobs are becoming obsolete. But actually, it's the opposite. The more voices we have, the more noise there is on social media, the more we need to sift the fact from the fiction, and that's where the journalist comes in. The journalist comes in terms of giving context to the story, fact-checking it, verifying it. It's the why and the how of the story. That's where the journalist comes in, and so we can't have these voices by themselves. We have to have journalists that are doing the work to contextualize the stories. So journalists shouldn't be afraid. They should see this as an opportunity for more sources of information. So we definitely need both. It's not an or. It's not citizen reporters or journalists. It's both together that make storytelling more unique and more shareable and more powerful.
When we hear Mojo and mobile journalism, we think about the mobile phone, but your story is this is only the beginning, because it's not necessarily the case that the mobile phone is the most important thing in the future. Can you tell us what you see there?
So for me, when I say Mojo, which is mobile journalism, it's two things for me. It's not, and the second part is maybe more important. It's by mobile, and mobile could mean any sort of mobile device. It doesn't have to be a mobile phone. It could be the wearable glasses, Snapchat spectacles. It could be any one of those mobile devices. But more importantly, what Mojo means is that it's created for a mobile. It's by mobile for mobile. That means that it's created with the consumption on a mobile always in mind. That means that we are which is the reason why our stories are mostly vertical, is because we're creating it for consumption on a mobile. That's why we always have subtitles, because we realize that when people are watching, they're not necessarily watching with the sound on. And so every consideration is made for how is this going to look on a mobile when it's being consumed. And allowing us to creating on a mobile allows us to think about consumption on a mobile. So it kind of walks hand in hand. So it doesn't necessarily, and I spoke a lot about AR and I spoke about VR and about wearable technology. And so for me, the device can change. It's not necessarily pegged to a mobile phone that we know today, but it needs to be made for mobile audiences.
When you talk about the subtitles, I find that a really interesting thing because, of course, we all say and we know that video is so important, but thanks to the way Facebook and Instagram show you videos, the written language has become important again as well.
You have to read it as well. Yeah, exactly. So, I mean, I think the stats are on Facebook for like a normal video, 80% of your audience are watching with the sound off because they're watching when they're commuting in trains, they're secretly watching at work when their bosses are not watching them. On a Facebook Live, for example, it's more like 90% of people are watching with the audio off. And so all of these considerations need to be made when we're creating for a mobile audience.
What are the biggest hurdles you have to take?
For mobile journalism? Or
for
our biggest challenge is, because we are a small team right now, our biggest challenge is scalability. So how do we scale this beyond us or beyond a kind of a newsroom setting? So that's one of our biggest challenges. And also working with hundreds of different types of mobile phones. If you go to India, it's mostly an Android market, and you're going to have tons of different types of Chinese phones, of Indian phones, of Apple phones, of all of these. And so we need to find apps and we need to find tips and tricks that work across all of these very fragmented kind of mobile devices. So that's also a challenge. But yeah, we see more opportunity than we see challenges right now.
Yeah, okay. Yeah. So what are your biggest opportunities?
The opportunity to tell stories from really hard to reach places, the opportunity to tell really unique stories that are not bubbling to the top of people's timelines because everybody's fishing in the same social ponds to discover news and to discover the types of stories that they're telling. So the opportunity to tell stories really hyper-local. And also, I mean, a big part of what #Our Stories is that we tell constructive stories. We find we don't just speak about the issues, but we say, here's an issue and here's someone trying to make it better, or here's how we can take that conversation forward in a constructive manner. So it's also about finding local solutions to global problems and making that connection between people. Also, the types of stories we tell is really about busting myths and stereotypes, checking people's prejudice, and about creating empathy and showing people similarities between themselves instead of differences. And if you look at a refugee, for example, there's a certain thing that we think about when we think of a refugee, and it's about changing that stereotype, and it's about saying, hey, this 18-year-old boy in a Serbian refugee camp from Afghanistan, he also likes Game of Thrones, and he also wears like Nike sneakers, or and he's more similar to you, and he has dreams and ambitions and things like that, exactly like an 18-year-old in the Netherlands, and it's about creating that or showing that those similarities as opposed to the polarizations.
Yeah. What is the story you've seen or you've published with #Our Story that or surprised you most, or you're the most proud of, or is it a story that wouldn't have been heard otherwise?
My favorite story that we've done is a story from Bhatkal in India. It's a small town in India, and it was a story of these young girls in niqab with their faces covered. And really, we don't really hear the story told from their perspective. We usually hear someone from the right wing saying why it's not good for people to cover their faces. Here's someone with niqab, this one Somali lady saying, hey, this is why I think it's fine. I want to wear the niqab. We really hear the voices of these women, of these young girls. And again, I come back to this point of not creating similarities, but showing similarities as opposed to differences. And I think that piece really did that. It's on Facebook. You guys can check it out. It's #Our Stories. Yeah.
Thank you very much, and success with your great project.
Thank you so much.
Jullie bedankt voor het kijken. We zijn hier nog niet weg. Tot 5:05, half 6 interviewgasten van het MOJO Conference. En daarna komt alles on demand online. Tot later.
Thank you so much.